boundaries are what you have to set when people don't respect your expectations.
Mm.
So, Wendy, if I come to you and I say, hey, you can reach me Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And after those hours, my phone is docked. And you start calling me outside of those hours for non-emergent issues, I eventually have to set a boundary with you. Here's the line in the sand. Just so you know, I'm not going to answer my phone. I'm going to turn it off. But if I can set the expectation and you respect that expectation, I don't need to set a boundary. So
I love that differentiator. I love that.
Welcome to Authentic Energy, a podcast dedicated to getting to the bottom of what it means to be your true, authentic self at work. I am your host, Wendy Brand, a former corporate executive turned transformation coach. Let's take this learning journey together as I meet with guests weekly to learn how they've managed, or not managed, to find the elusive boundaries and success in their career and what it really means to find balance. Welcome back to the Authentic Energy Podcast. I took a short break for 2 weeks. It was Good Friday after all, and then this last weekend, I went on an amazing retreat facilitated by Renee Trudeau. She's an author, coach, speaker, and it was at the Kripalu Center in Massachusetts. The landscape in the Berkshires is amazing. I had never been to that part of the country before, and the uniqueness of this retreat facility is that it is a technology-free zone. So there were designated areas where you could have your cell phone, but in general, we did not have our phones with us most of the day. And the breakfasts were silent breakfasts. So we would get our tray of food and sit and eat in silence. And it was a nice way to kind of start the morning instead of reaching right for my phone and getting my day started in the busyness of it, but really stopping and kind of mindfully eating my breakfast. Anyway, the overall retreat was amazing. It felt so good to just change up my environment, disconnect for a bit, and really take some introspective time to slow down and check in with myself. Since I left my job, in late October of last year, I've pretty much been running full speed. I launched my website and started my coaching certification in November. Then I held a workshop in December. I began coaching clients in January, launched a podcast in February. Finally, in March, I started becoming more intentional about adding in some social things like trying to maintain my friendships. And here we are in April, and that's just the first quarter of the year. And I have some incredible things coming up this summer. So before we get into the podcast and I introduce you to our amazing guest, which I'm excited for you to hear from, I first wanted to let you know about 2 specific events that I have coming up in the next few months. So first of all, in June, I'll be hosting my 2-day True You workshop at my home in New Braunfels, Texas. We sit on 65 acres of Texas Hill Country, and it's the perfect spot to just step away from your day-to-day and really think about, just take some of that introspective time, think about where you're headed in life, who you are today, who you want to be going forward. But really just taking some time to reset. This is the same workshop that I piloted in December. And some things will be the same, like a gorgeous sound bath meditation and our True You curriculum. But I'll also be adding a forest bathing session, Texas Hill Country style, and a fun art project to get you back into your creative mind. So that's the workshop. That's in June. You can check out on my website those dates. And then in July, I'll be hosting the first ever Authentic Energy Retreat at the beautiful Savannah Resort in Carefree, Arizona, aptly named town, Carefree, Arizona. This is a 4-day immersive experience where you'll be pampered and catered to as you step into a more calm, rested version of yourself. So information on these retreats are on my website at wendybrandcoaching.com. So go check that out if you're interested. We'd love to have you. It will be, these are smaller the retreat at my home, the workshop at my home is definitely a smaller, more intimate event. So it'll be limited space available there. Savannah, there's a little bit more room, but it is coming up fast in July. So go check it out. Book your spot now if you're interested. Okay, so now on with the program. I'm so excited to share today's podcast with you. My guest is an executive coach, leadership consultant, corporate trainer, clinical psychologist, volunteer, mom, wife. So Dr. Alessandra Wall is the founder of Noteworthy. It's an executive coaching firm focused on elevating and empowering senior and executive leading women in STEM and finance. She has spent thousands of hours working with hundreds of women leaders in the world over, helping them to be wildly successful and deeply fulfilled. As a 15-plus year clinical psychologist, she knows that degrees and experience, knowledge, and long hours aren't enough. She has earned the reputation of being a coach who combines strategic pragmatism, genuine empathy, and a deep understanding of the human mind to propel her clients further, faster, and better. Dr. Wall wants to build a world where women at the highest levels of leadership and success are so common, it's no longer noteworthy. In our podcast episode, she shares her own story of burnout and real-life examples of women that she is helping to continue on the upward trajectory of their careers and set and hold expectations about what they need to be successful. I think you will find this podcast really impactful and full of some great learnings for us all. Thank you so much for listening. Here it is. Hi, Alessandra. Thank you so much for joining the Authentic Energy podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Let's just start out by having you tell us where you kind of started in your career and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I started my career thinking I would be like the character Lowenstein in The Prince of Tides. For anybody who's read the book or watched the movie, I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, very specifically. In my wildest dreams, I had an office in New York facing everything. The reality was I opened a private practice. I was in private practice for myself. Close to straight out of graduate school, was working first with children that had my own kids. And then it lost all the fun and the charm. Moved on or went back to working with adults. And I did that exclusively for 7 years. And maybe it was a 7-year itch. I don't know what it was, but I got to a point where I went from loving what I did, genuinely walking into work every single day. I would sing. I would sit in my office and I would be, no exaggeration, giddy at the opportunity, at the conversations I was having, to also quite literally wanting to run out of my office. I had this huge sliding glass door, and I had this image of myself opening the door, running out and saying, "Do something about it." And I was in my mid-30s at the time, so I had to figure out what else to do, and I had no idea what to do because I'd never considered any other career path ever, or the ones I had been promptly turned down.
Yeah.
Being a professional chef, turned down by parents. I wanted to go into marketing, turned down by my dad, who didn't like it. Wasn't good enough to do it, to be an engineer, at least in math. So turned down by the realities of my academic ability. And decided, if this was so hard for me to figure out as a psychologist, what must it be for other people? And also being at that point where I had 2 children who were pretty young and just trying to figure out how you navigate the shift in who you are as a parent. I'll say as a woman, because I can't speak for men on this one, but as a woman, pre and post children, and especially as a professional woman, pre and post children. But I opened a life coaching practice, and I wanted it to be everything my therapy practice was not. And I hated what I built. I worked so hard. I followed everybody's advice, sometimes my own. I worked myself to true burnout. And after 3.5 or 4 years of doing that, took a 6-month hiatus from that. This whole time, I'm also operating as a clinical psychologist and raising 2 small children.
Oh, wow.
And I took 6 months off, considered what I loved about the work I had been doing, what I hated, what was working for me, what my vision and my mission was. And I'm living it now. So that's the good end to the story to everybody who's
Awesome.
listened this far is now I have this company called Noteworthy, which is also a coaching company, but it is focused primarily on elevating, on supporting, on accelerating the careers of executive women in STEM and in finance. So highly male dominated fields that have to do with industries that shape the way every single one of us lives, operates, and thrives. And I love I love what I'm doing now so much.
Awesome. That is incredible. And one of the reasons I really was excited to have you on the podcast is that, that psychology background and your own experience with burnout. I've shared on the show many times. I mean, the reason I started the podcast is I burned out and really have kind of gone on this journey to hear from other women that have either made it through the other side, or that have managed to just kind of find that balance and boundaries within the corporate world, without burning out. And I know there are plenty of people that are doing it. But I love your background in the psychology side of it, the having been through the burnout and now helping others, executives to really be successful in their role. And what a great industry area with STEM and finance. That's incredible. So I'm curious, your definition of success, has it changed over time?
Massively. Yeah.
What was it, and kind of how has it evolved?
Again, I'm going to go back a little bit
Yeah.
because, and this is me talking both as a human being and as a psychologist, I think a lot of us spend so much time, and a lot of education spends so much time focusing on the first 18 to 21 years of life. And then we skip all the way ahead to maybe menopausal stages for women, and then everything in between us, like we don't evolve, when the reality is, if you think of who you were at even 21 versus 26, I think 26 is that first age developmental stage where most of us look back and we go, oh my goodness, I'm not at all the same person I was, which
Yes.
makes me question getting married before 26, but
Yeah,
that's another
right.
conversation for another day. And then it happens again in our 30s and our 40s and our 50s. I would say when I was really young, being successful was that image of Barbara Streisand and her, it was the 80s. Come on. And so in my gray suit with my pearls and my power pose. But really, actually, when I pictured fulfillment, so success to me is this marrying of achievement and fulfillment. It was very simple. Like before having children, I had these visions so weird and mundane of cleaning dishes and watching my kids play outdoors and just basking in the joy of that moment while also owning a business and making a difference in people's lives. Having children paradoxically made me so much more ambitious professionally, which complicated my life. And life was really easy when I was just satisfied with the mundane. And anybody who's lucky enough to be there, I want you to know I'm not using that word in any pejorative way. I literally mean life was easier when I didn't want quite as much. Something about having children, something about where it positioned me, or maybe how it limited me, made me realize that there was this potential, this opportunity out in the world, so much more that I could achieve that I had not even considered. And then success became twofold. So one, it's making a significant impact in the world. This idea of legacy. I have a legacy I want to leave. I want to know that I participated in making the world significantly better. And part of the issue with therapy was I could do that one individual at a time. That was too slow. And the global impact of that was not something I could measure. The other thing, which is an ego piece for me, maybe a little bit, I say I want to build something big. So I don't just want a business that functions. I have that, then I'm good. If that were I want Noteworthy to become a household name. I want it to be the place where women who are either stuck in their careers or who are exactly where they want, but they want to own that space because they too want to build an impact. When they realize they need help doing that and stepping into that power and authority, it's like, oh, Noteworthy, like that's where we go. And I want a global, huge business. So for me, success is this marrying of being able to do that without sacrificing everything. So fulfillment has to be there with the purpose of some kind of greater impact.
Yes, I get that. And so it's really, you said it's the achievement plus fulfillment, but with an impact, with a global, in your case, impact. I love that. And so one of the things that, as I've been going on this journey and really doing some introspective work of why I burned out, I also wanted the achievement and the fulfillment. But I stopped kind of prioritizing things that I needed to do for myself so that I could stay in the game, and keep achieving. And so I'm curious, what do you do? Are there things that you kind of, as you're growing your business, to keep from kind of depleting your energy or burning out? Because I'm sure wanting to take on all the things that it can deplete your energy.
Yeah.
So what do you prioritize to?
So there are a couple things I've learned that work for me, and some that I know work universally because I've tested them. So the thing that works universally, if you're listening to this podcast, one thing you can do, probably the most important thing that any of us can do, is get in the habit of creating small breaks within your day. And few of us do that. I'm totally still guilty at times of working for 6 hours in a row. Like I'll stop to go use the bathroom or to eat something, but it's just this standing thing where you work, but your brain doesn't, your brain is like, it's like your computer. You know how when your computer's battery gets low, suddenly the processing speed in your computer just slows down?
Yes.
Your brain does the same thing, except we don't have a 13-hour battery. We have about a 45-minute battery. So when you push yourself to work, you can do it, but you're working at a lower and lower level of efficiency. So we practice something called the art of nothing, which is also, to me, a response to being bombarded by data and information and noise all the time. And it literally involves spending minimum 2, but you'll see once you start practicing it, you'll want to spend more like 20. And on weekends, no joke, I can spend 90 minutes doing this time just sitting somewhere and staring into space. Not practicing meditation, that's a doing thing, even though it's a check mark thing. Oh, I meditated today. Check mark. I'm not listening to music. I'm not listening to podcasts. I'm not playing Candy Crush. I'm not checking my email. I have this chair outside my window. When I used to have an office, I had a stoop and I would just go sit and just be. Keep my eyes open, look at what's happening. You don't have to be still. And the value is multifold. So one, it's that rebooting of your brain. It's like plugging your computer in and turning it off when it's been running a little hot and you can hear that fan kick in. The other value that's really important is it gives you an opportunity, that slowing down, that removing external noise gives you an opportunity to tune in internally. So suddenly you can check in with yourself and ask yourself, how am I feeling? Am I tired? Am I energized? Am I anxious? Am I nervous? Am I feeling good? Right? And then taking that one step further, what's going on that I'm feeling this way? And what do I want to do about that? There are tons of ways of doing this. One of the ways I force myself is I use Pomodoro timers or focus timers. that go on if I'm not in calls with clients or meetings that I can use to force myself to take breaks. It is life-changing. And every noteworthy woman, I used to specialize in anxiety. So this is when I developed this was at that time. Actually, it was when I was building my first coaching practice, and I realized I was incapable of slowing down. Like, it made me nervous. It made me anxious to slow down. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I have to be able to take a break without feeling guilty, without feeling like I should do more dishes or do something else. And so I started by forcing myself to sit outside. I live in San Diego, so I'm lucky enough that the weather, not this year, but most years, is beautiful most days. So I would just sit after putting my youngest kid at the time to bed for his afternoon nap. And I was like, just one coffee. I'm Italian and French, so the coffee at that age, the caffeine did nothing. So I would just sip a coffee. I'm like, you can do this, but it was excruciating initially.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love that you do the timer, because I was sitting here thinking, how would I know when to take, like, I'd have to calendar it in or something, like when to take those little breaks. But even thinking back when I was 6 months ago in my corporate role, in back-to-back meetings, barely time to go to the bathroom. I'm curious what you would say, but I would think that I should have probably scheduled in on my calendar so that people couldn't book over it, even though they probably would have anyway. But really being intentional about scheduling that. And I probably wouldn't have been able to go sit outside. I guess I could have. But for those that are in a corporate environment, is it the same?
It can be. So, if you can't sit outside, you just sit inside, stare out a window, or you stare at the ground or whatever. Like, the idea is to stop flooding your brain. For humans for millennia went to bed when the sun set. Right? We didn't have an artificial sun in our house that kept us us neurochemically awake. We, until the 50s, didn't have TV. Maybe we listened to radio, but there was a lot of downtime. And so our bodies, our brains are designed to need that downtime. We know that in environments where people are close to airports or lots of noise, the levels of depression and anxiety are higher. The levels of anger and irritability are higher. We're not designed to be exposed to constant stimulation, even if we think we can tune it out. So if you're in, you use the word should, and should is, the problem with should is it's so easy to say in hindsight, I should have, right? But you didn't, for a variety of reasons. One, you just mentioned, you didn't have control over your schedule. Or I'm going to shift that language for a second. You didn't take control over your schedule.
Right.
So if you are the person scheduling the meetings, end the meeting early. It is so rare for a meeting to need a full hour. And honestly, those last 5 minutes, if you're managing your time well, shouldn't matter. There's something I read the other day, which I think many of us have heard before, which is true, is people treat you how you allow them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we set the expectations for how we're treated. And therefore, if we're not telling people, well, I can't do back to back, right? I love the term bio break.
Yeah. Right.
It's so sanitary, right? I can't do, I need to go pee, right? I can't do back to back. I'm sorry. I need to go grab some water. We find ourselves having to create excuses.
Yeah.
Like, it's not enough to just say my brain needs a break.
Yeah.
When we talk about building success, creating careers and lives that are right for us, it involves taking ownership of how you live and learning to set those boundaries. And I know it's easier said than done. I'll also tell you, because I work with women who very often one of the barriers to coming in, or one of the, I don't know if I can do this, is I don't have enough time. I'm like, that's never going to change.
Right.
You have to choose how you want to spend that time. And the more we start advocating for a healthier way we spend our time, the more that will be granted to us. And I guarantee you're not alone. Everybody else in that meeting is going, dear Lord, please get me out of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Right? As good, even if it's an excellent meeting and a really important meeting, going back to back is it's just terrible.
It's exhausting. And I was at an organization prior to that where they implemented a 45-minute meeting mandate, right? We don't do hour-long meetings. They're 45 minutes. That gives everyone 15 minutes to, do what they need to do, stop and close their eyes and just think for a second, whatever it is. So I love that whole concept.
Yeah. I'm curious, did people respect that? How many people use the extra 15 minutes?
At first they respected it, and then over time it stopped. And, it really is, it is a leadership. Leadership has to be on board and living the example, or it just doesn't work. The minute that the CEO schedules something with my boss for an hour, then she felt like she could start scheduling things with us for an hour, and it's a ripple effect.
I was once called into work with a company because they were having such massive turnover. They were just bleeding people right and left. And I was lucky enough to not only get to work with the whole leadership team across several states, but then also to work with many of the individual contributors. And I remember one leader who would often get on the phone crying, who could not do any of the things I would ask her to do. And it wasn't because anybody else was preventing her from doing it. It's because she just couldn't give herself permission.
Mm-hmm.
And she was desperate to not burden her team. So she would say one thing, but her actions were different. I'm like, here's the thing. You're on Slack at 1 a.m.
Right.
What is your team supposed to think when they see that stamp? It's not that you're at 1 a.m. West Coast time, or East Coast time, when you're West Coast. I'm like, 1 a.m. your time. So they're going to take their lead from you. If the lead that you're setting is the second a Slack is sent out, the second you receive a text, I respond. The second an email is sent, I respond. Then you're setting the expectation that they have to be that reactive to every request, every piece of information. If you can't help yourself from working at 1 a.m., which honestly was killing her, at least use a delay send.
Yeah.
That delay send is really useful. Hit delay send.
Yeah. And the way that I know that it is about us being in control and not the corporate or my leader's fault, was my responsibility, is because now owning my own schedule and being in charge of what my day looks like, I still struggle to not sit here for 8 to 10 hours, so it is definitely a choice. And in hindsight, now that I've experienced this of having my own, and so I'll share, I'm saying this so anybody that's still in corporate that doesn't want to leave or doesn't have the luxury of being able to leave, that it is in our control. If, it's just as hard outside of corporate as it is in corporate. And so taking that responsibility and giving yourself permission and prioritizing yourself is crucial. Okay. So are there any examples of clients that are actually setting boundaries and speaking up for themselves when negotiating jobs or asking for what they want in their current role? Because it sounds good, it sounds, but I know for me, I would, I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to speak up and be strong about what I really needed.
Right. Yes. The short answer to that question is yes, because the way I look at it again, and maybe it's thanks to the fact that I never worked in the corporate world, is I am adamant that it is possible. And I have examples in the corporate space of women who do it and who do it well. Some are existing clients and some are just other women I know.
Yeah.
When we work at Noteworthy, I always talk about the 5 systems that need to be developed in order to build careers that are wildly successful and deeply fulfilling. Those 2 things come together, not just successful, not just fulfilling, both. And the 5th system that we call freedom. I didn't come up with that word. It's the word the women I was working with used to describe work-life balance. And the freedom system is very much about two things. One, it's about establishing work habits that help us be more effective. I hate the concept of productivity. The notion of being productive is what put us in this position we are now. Because productive is, how can I get as much work done with every hour I have in my day where I am not sleeping or on the toilet?
Mm-hmm.
Effective is, how can I get the work I need to get done well, maybe even very well, in the least amount of time possible, so that I am free to do the other things I also want to do? And so we're aiming for being effective or efficient, but really effective, because that effective is also that concept of doing things well. So not just efficient. And then the other piece that comes into that is about learning how to own, set, maintain your expectations and your boundaries. There's a distinction between those two things. People talk about boundaries all the time, but boundaries are what you have to set when people don't respect your expectations.
Mm.
So, if I come to you and I say, hey, you can reach me Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And after those hours, my phone is docked. And you start calling me outside of those hours for non-emergent issues, I eventually have to set a boundary with you. Here's the line in the sand. Just so you know, I'm not going to answer my phone. I'm going to turn it off. But if I can set the expectation and you respect that expectation, I don't need to set a boundary. So
I love that differentiator. I love that. Go ahead.
You.
Sorry. Yeah.
No. So what we do is, first of all, you have to know what expectations you want to set. And that is one of the first things we do before we do anything else, before we build visibility or authority or social capital. We work with the women at Noteworthy to determine, what is it that you need in order to be satisfied with how you live and to be successful. And then we use that list of needs, not once, to determine what their ask is going to be. That's a negotiation piece. What expectations they need to set with other people, and also eventually what boundaries they'll need to set so that those expectations are respected. This is central to all the work we do. And I think I have two clients whose stories I love to share around this. So one client is my client, Mandy. When I first met Mandy, she's a vice president for a very large organization that supports event planning, corporate event planning. And Mandy was ridiculously successful, right? So wildly successful, check, at the cost of everything else. She was exhausted. She was having panic attacks. She wasn't sleeping well. She was doing a lot of things because she's very active and very social, but she was tired in doing them. And with Mandy, we worked really hard initially to do certain things like limiting her workday. She worked from home. So we had to, and this is back pre-2020, right? Mm-hmm. We had to block off her time in her day, and then teach her the art of nothing. So she would take breaks, and then have her define what she needed to be fulfilled, which in part was exercising at the time, and get her to do that, to take a break in the middle of the day. What we found with Mandy is we got to a point where I got her to work fewer hours in her day, right? And the first year she did this, she came back to me and she said, I had the most successful and profitable business year I have ever had, wow, despite taking on fewer clients, working fewer hours. She also lost a ton of weight. She took control of her health. We were able to determine at the time that she was going through menopause or perimenopause. That was contributing to some of what was going on, but she didn't have time to do any of that, right? To go to the doctor. Right. And she has maintained that. And what Mandy did with that spare time is she wrote a book, she launched a podcast. I mean, she filled it because that's who she is.
Right.
She filled it with things that are fulfilling.
Yes.
And then the other client whose story I love on this, and these again are two women for whom being professionally successful is part of their identity. They work ridiculous hours. If you think of somebody who works in the corporate event planning space, they're on call when events are going on, and you have to be smiling and wow, just like all the time. And luckily she's naturally like that. As my client Jenny, who when she came to me had been working in an organization for a few years and was pretty miserable. She initially, we were considering leaving the organization she was in, and then she got a lateral transfer under another boss, and we thought things would look better. And unfortunately for her, she got placed on a glass cliff. So if somebody's listening to this and doesn't know what a glass cliff is something that occurs very often to women. It's when you're put in charge of a project that is doomed to fail. And then when it fails, of course, it's your fault, but nobody could have made it work. And very often what we see is women in leadership and women in executive positions get tasked with these, like nobody else, but you'll do it. And when it finally completely fails, that goes against you. So for her, the failure was her boss had been in charge of the project for 2 years, had not been able to turn it around, brought her in, but didn't let her operate any differently than the way he had operated for 2 years. So, nothing was going to happen. She was tired. She was exhausted. She was being pinged all the time. She worked for a large global energy company. She had teams in Asia. She had teams in Europe. She had teams in the US. So they have all the hours. And what she started to do is once she owned her own value and accepted that she was never going to be able to please everybody, she started deciding what was most important to her. And then she disseminated it in her teams. So as a leader, she did things like put on her email, hey, I realize we don't all work the same hours. So I'm sending this right now because it's convenient to me, some version of this, but I don't expect you to answer right now. She would have conversations with her team about their time and their energy and set expectations off the bat of when she would be available and not, and then encourage them to follow her lead on that availability. And the more she could regain control of her time and her space, the more room she had to breathe and think about what she wanted and she needed. And the good news with Jenny is she is no longer working for that company. Actually, she left and she is now CFO. So a huge shift.
Wow.
Of a larger company, still really exhausting, right? When you first start a job, usually you put in. But even as she's walking in and as she negotiated the terms, she negotiated amazing terms, she 3x'd her salary. She negotiated flexibility. Even as she came in with the ask. She came in setting the expectation and made it all part of how she's going to work. And they love her.
That's fantastic. And I had someone on the show previously who she had done that. She's a chief marketing officer, and she was very clear about her expectations, and they have bent over backwards to meet those expectations because of the work that she brings and the value that she delivers. And I think I love what you said, because to me, that's the key, is really understanding your value and knowing what you bring and being confident in what you bring to the table so that you can say, I'm bringing all of these gifts that I have, and this is the way that I want to work in this space. And I think those are two great examples. Yeah.
What we've consistently found this. I mean, I could share another story. I have a client who came to me very specifically for that. Her career was in an ascension phase. Mm-hmm. And she came because she said, I don't know what to say no to. And I have a tendency to say yes to everything. And A, it's exhausting. B, I have priorities outside of the home, the children, a family she wants to take care of. C, if I say yes to everything, it's not strategic. So for those of you who are really career minded, think about setting boundaries as a way to be far more strategic with your career, and therefore to be more impactful and to advance faster, sooner to the places you want to go. And we did the same thing, right? Start with defining what's right for you so that you know how to set better priorities, eventually get down to the minutia of it, which is art of nothing, how to manage to-dos on a daily basis, how to set limits around your time. And what she found was exactly the same thing we found with Mandy. She works for a large financial organization, and she got handpicked to be head of a division. She was a managing director. She's still technically a managing director, but she's also head of a very large division. She didn't ask for it. She was selected, went through an application process, got a raise, is loving it. But it might seem paradoxical to many listeners to realize that never would have happened had she not decided to start setting boundaries around her time and her energy, and then focusing on things that allowed her to be much more impactful, much happier, which allows her to be a better leader, and then have that be noticed by other people. So she's not, Noteworthy, we talk about workhorse versus powerhouse. So instead of being known as a workhorse, Wonder Woman, the person who says yes to everything at all times for everyone, being known as somebody who's going to come in and really excel and shine in a space, and being known for the things you want to be known for.
That sounds so much better than being the other. Like that, the powerhouse just sounds so much more impactful than being the workhorse.
Well, and let's be realistic for a second. This, Wendy, there's a lot of work you have to put in to get there. And that's for anybody listening who wants to do work around energy, and it's, you can't wait till you burn out to decide to work with somebody like Wendy or somebody like me, because the work we have to do to pull you out of that hole is huge. It'll take you longer to get where you need to go, and it's much more likely that you'll drop out. And you can't use the fact that you're busy and you have no time as an excuse to not do this work, because the reality is that time issue is not going anywhere.
Right.
And so it's about deciding what your priorities are and accepting that for a short period of time, you are going to be more tired. You are going to sacrifice more time and more energy. But unlike all the other places where you've been doing this, that sacrifice of time and energy, that investment that you're making is actually going to lead you to a place where you create more time, you create more space, you make yourself healthier, you make your life better.
So impactful. Well, the last question before we go into some more fun kind of personal questions is really just, I'm curious if in working with organizations or in working with, individuals from the leadership lens, is there any guidance that you could provide for leaders that are wanting to kind of set that tone in the workplace?
Yeah. Again, I'll go back to what I said earlier, walk the talk. I am known to call things out, and I will call a lot of leaders out, people who are doing supposedly are great, supporters of women. And I say, on paper, your website looks great, but here's what I know. I'm having conversations with your women, and they're still the ones being asked to take the notes or to do this or to do that. Or they're like, we have tons of women in leadership. I'm like, who do you have above VP in this banking industry? Nobody. That's what I thought. And if you do, they're old white women, which is exactly what I will be one day. But could we just have a little diversity there? So walk the talk. Don't say you care about people and then expect them to work long hours or give them grief if they need to miss a meeting, or ask them to justify why they're not at work. If they're meeting their obligations, doesn't matter whether they leave at 2 p.m. or whether they leave at 5 p.m. If the work is getting done and is getting done well, that is one thing. The other thing I would say is have the courage to question the way you're doing things. There's so much talk about, well, this is just what we do. When it comes to meetings, well, we need meetings. Before 2020, we didn't have as many meetings as we have now. So we don't need all these meetings. because the more time you spend in meetings, the more you're asking for people to do the work that's discussed in the meetings in the evenings or during
Right.
weekends or during the morning. To me, there is courage because you're going to be pushing against anybody higher than you, and you're going to be pushing against the system. And also you're potentially costing yourself more work in the short term at looking at how you do things and asking yourself, does it really need to be done this way? And if you're honest, there are a lot of things that we do and expect that aren't, and there's some that are and that need to be maintained as such. That's it. We need to start questioning the status
Yeah.
quo and having the courage to ask those questions and push when we're told no.
Yeah. Because why not? I mean, what is there to lose, right? Having that courage and just speaking up. I feel like that is one of the biggest regrets that I have from my corporate career, is really just not being brave enough to speak up and to say when I disagreed, or when that environment was toxic, or rather than just leaving, being able to speak up. And then if you get pushback, maybe it is time to move on, but really having the courage to speak up and question it. I think that's great advice.
Well, you probably also didn't have the support. I mean, that's again,
Right.
why do any of us, I hire a coach too. I've hired many.
Right.
Why do we hire coaches? Why do we go to support groups? Why do we join women's groups or whatever?
Right.
Because we need somebody else to remind us that the things we see, the things we want are normal and are worthy, and that we deserve it. Right. And that is difficult sometimes when you're on your own. It's just, so that's why I use the word courage. There's a lot of courage in the other thing. In order to do that, just as an aside, is it requires defining what outcome you're trying to reach. Like, what is the purpose of what we're doing? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And then with that being what's going to be your guiding principle, then what's the best way of achieving that? Is it what we're doing, or is it something else?
Yes.
I just don't think people ask themselves those questions anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so now for some fun questions, just more personal, get to know a little bit more about you. What would you, or what one thing brings you just joy?
Can I name two?
You can name two.
Okay. The first thing that came to mind was reading. I love reading. I love a good book. I love great fiction. I love reading. And then the other one is literally sitting outside and staring into space. And the day I die, here's how I want to die. I want to die seated outside in my, very old, otherwise healthy, seated outside in my yard with a book in my hands, one page from the end, so that I leave the world knowing that there was always more.
That gives me chills. That's awesome. Now, are you like tangible book, like a actual physical book? Or are you a reader?
All of them. So okay. I'm an e-reader mostly because I read at night before going to bed.
Yeah.
I have some physical books behind me. It takes me forever to read them, and I audiobooks. So I have all of it. Most of my nonfiction I'll listen to, and then if I love it, I'll buy the book. So if those books are back, these are all nonfiction, and if they're back there, it's because I listened to them, love them, and then I want a copy, often to share.
Cool. I love it. Okay. So next, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, like your 5, 6, 7-year-old self, what would you tell her?
Be brave. I was a very good girl. I did all the good things. I did all the safe things. If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said what I've said for years, which is don't just do what's right, do what's right for you. But lately I've been meeting women who I think are trailblazers, and they've just achieved so much. And what differentiates me in them is that they showed a level of courage and bravery, and they took risks where I was raised to play it really safe. And I kind of wish I could go back to that little girl and go, oh, just break the rules. Don't worry whether it makes sense or not. Just do it. Like if you think you can build this thing, achieve this thing, so just try it. Worst comes to worst, you can just go back to what you were doing before. So yeah, to take risks, maybe not to be brave, to take more risks.
Okay. I love that. And the good news is you're doing that now, right? You are trailblazing. Okay. So do you like to travel?
I do.
I love to travel. So what's the most favorite place you've been? And then what's on your bucket list?
I don't know that I can name a most favorite, but the most favorite recent is I went to Costa Rica 2 years ago or a year and a half ago with some girlfriends to go surf. I'd never surfed. And so everything about it, the water's warm, the people are absolutely wonderful. Learning how to surf was great. That strength in that movement. I took my family 8 months later. So same place, different.
Cool.
And I love Costa Rica. I'd like to see more of it. And then bucket list, I have visited so little of Asia. I've seen Taiwan and I've seen a few islands in Thailand, not Phuket, but some other ones. I would love to visit. I know this is so broad, but more of Asia. And I can't even put my finger on where, just more of.
Yes, I'm with you. And I also went to Costa Rica for the first time for my 50th. So it was about a year and a half ago. And my husband and this other couple friend of ours, because surfing has been on my bucket list. Mm-hmm. So we went to a surf resort and learned how to surf. Now, I was up on the surfboard for a very short time, but I am going back to Mexico. I'm going to Mexico in about a month. And I am going to take lessons until I get it right.
That's great. When we get off air, I'll tell you where I went to go surf, and it's designed for mostly beginners because of the way the waves are in Costa Rica. Okay. And it's a surf school. And the person who organized this trip is an avid surfer. And she did her research in terms of finding a place that was affordable and really focused on surfing. So,
okay. Yes. I want to get that name from you. Cool. Well, that is it. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation and very educational. I really appreciate your time so much and bringing your experience onto the show.
Thank you so much. In terms of energy, I love these conversations because I leave energized, right? It is like this massive jolt of caffeine. So thank you for that, sincerely.
And where can people find you? How can they see your programs and follow you?
Two places. So the company website is noteworthyinc.co. So noteworthyinc.co. And the place where you can get the most updated information is LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and it's under Dr. Alessandra Wall is the handle, if there's such a thing, on LinkedIn.
Yeah. We'll put all that in the show notes. Fantastic, Alessandra. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me on, Wendy.
What a great episode. So thankful for Dr. Alessandra Wall and her time with us today. So here's my takeaways. Number 1, success is the marrying up of achievement plus fulfillment plus impact. Number 2, create small breaks for yourself throughout the day to experience the art of nothing. This does not include meditating, checking emails, playing Candy Crush, etc. Just sit, stare into space to reset your brain, because removing external noises gives you an opportunity to listen internally. Check in with yourself to think about how you're feeling, acknowledge what is happening to make you feel that way, and decide what you want to do about it. Number 3, walk the talk. As a leader, you need to set the example. If you're going to be on Slack or sending emails at 1 a.m., use delay send. Number 4, productivity is how can I get as much work done in the time that I have in the day, versus being effective is how can I get the work done well in the least amount of time possible so that I can do more of what I enjoy. Number 5, boundaries are what you must set when people don't respect your expectations. Number 6, it's critical to learn how to own, set, and maintain your expectations. First, determine what expectations you want to set. In other words, what needs do you have in order to reach your version of success? What expectations do you need to set for others? And what boundaries will you put in place if the expectations are not respected? Number 7, the glass cliff is when you are put in charge of a project that is doomed to fail and you are given the task to fix it. And if you fail, it is your fault, even though nobody else could have been successful at this project. Number 8, be a powerhouse instead of a workhorse. Number 9, if you say yes to everything, it is not strategic. Setting boundaries can help you be more strategic in your career, be more impactful in the work you do, and advance more quickly to the places you want to go. That's it. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can find Dr. Alessandra Wall on LinkedIn at Dr. Alessandra Wall and learn more about what her company Noteworthy is doing and how to work with her at noteworthyinc.co. That's noteworthyinc.co. Thank you guys so much for listening. Appreciate you all so much. Have a great day.